Welcome to episode 8 of the Leading Complexity video podcast. This is where we explore the art of leading organization in today's complex, hyper-competitive landscape. In each episode, we will explore cutting-edge strategies with some of the foremost thinkers in leadership. Join us and discover how to make your organization thrive and lead in a constantly evolving world. My name is Tomas Björkholm, and with me I have Michael Göthe.
So today we're going to talk about Wardley Mapping, and that comes from Simon Wardley. So he has given the name to his method of visualization of value chains. So before we go into the interview that we made with him, just a short explanation of what Wardley Mapping is. So he has created a way of visualizing, so going from the value that is most close to the user on the top, what the user sees, and breaking any product or service down to its kind of smallest components, the nuts and bolts of things. So in this example that he typically shares is a tea boutique, tea shop. And at the top is what the user sees, the cup of coffee or cup of tea. And at the bottom, you have power and the kettle, etc. And on the x-axis, you see the maturity of the components or the products of a service. And all technologies mature. Power, for example, there's a lot of things going on to get power from the outlet in the wall, but we don't think about it. It's just this there. But that's a commodity now. And in this example, the kettle here is custom built. And if you think about it in a tea shop, why would they have a custom built kettle? So maybe it's a mistake, or maybe it's a strategic choice that this is a boutique shop that offers also maybe the kettle for sales or something like that. Or maybe that's their thing, that's their brand. Or so it could be by intention. But by visualizing your service like this, it enables you to have strategic conversations about what are the different components, which ones can we buy, for example, which one should we focus on developing ourselves, etc. And Simon has this fantastic story about a client he worked with, where he discovered mapping this out, that they had custom built server racks. And that was something, and they kind of saw the map, and then how come you have custom built server racks? Well, it was a custom installation sometime long ago that they had been forced to adopt some server racks, and by kind of accident, now they reconfigured all the standard server racks to make them custom built, and of course that increase complexity and costs a lot. So yeah, it's a really useful tool to have strategic conversations. And also what Simon also points out often is that, for example, for engineering and marketing, they speak kind of across each other. They don't understand. It's like they would speak in total different languages. If an engineer says, we need to invest in this component KPR, and the marketing guy say, why? What's that? But by creating a visual map of the value chain and the maturity of the product, now you can have strategic conversations across in the organization, which is really valuable.
Sounds really interesting. What about going to the interview?
Yes, let's hear what Simon has to say. Hi, Simon. Great to have you on the program this year. Good to see you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Complete delight to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me along.
So for those who don't know you, could you just briefly say, who are you?
Oh gosh, so my name is Simon Wardley. I work in research for a company called DXC. I used to be a former CEO of companies as well. I built and sold startups. I'm best known for creating something called Wardley Mapping, which is a technique I created, 18 years ago. And I've used in industry and commercial industry and government and all sorts of different places. I do a lot of speaking at public conferences. I'm also a fellow of Open Europe. And lastly, I suppose I'm a self-appointed thought lord. I got so tired of people calling themselves thought leaders. I thought, well, I'll be a thought lord then. And I've got a particular like of ducks. I used to have a duck pond, and ducks, they're foul, but not through choice. So I think they're wonderful creatures. So that's roughly me.
Great. So I think the first thought lords we have on the program.
Oh, a thought lord. I know. Yes, very serious. And one of the so I invented Wardley Mapping. We were talking actually earlier about the origin of Wardley Maps, and I used to just call them maps. And then people would say, well, what sort of maps are they? And I thought, oh, I don't know. And they describe the value chain of an organization. So we call value chain maps. And somebody said, oh, you can't use that. Someone else is using that. Oh, okay. So what do you use them for? Well, I use them for all sorts of things. Challenge, strategy. Oh, strategy maps. Oh, someone else has got that. Oh, you've got to have a name. And eventually I just said, well, just call them Wardley Maps because it's an uncommon name. No one else will have them out there. And that literally is, where that name started from. Never ask me to name things. I'm very useless at that.
And now the tool is so used and started to have been spread that we were joking about that you are called named after the tool.
Yeah, that's quite funny.
Okay, so our program, we call it Leading in Complexity. So why should leaders care about complexity?
Oh gosh, why should leaders care about complexity? Well, first of all, you're a leader, which I assume means you're leading something, as in an organization, and organizations themselves are dynamic and sort of complex systems of social interactions between people. The second thing is that organization is doing something in a landscape, usually an economic landscape, and that economic landscape is a dynamic and complex interaction of economic components and forces. Why should you care about being a leader of a dynamic and complex organization dealing in a space which is dynamic and complex by nature? Because it's in the word, isn't it? It's in the very definition of what you're doing. So, but we normally cheat. One of my favorite things is Ashby's law of requisite variety. So for those who don't know, Ashby's law is basically the controlling system has to have as much complexity as the inputs and outputs of what is being managed to effectively manage the space. And what's interesting about that is there are two solutions. Either you make the controlling system capable of coping with understanding what's going on, or the second solution is you pretend that what's being managed is simple. And we love doing that through what are called KPIs. So we produce these wonderful KPIs all over the place. Perfect way of managing them. They just make life simple for us rather than expose us to the real horror of what's going on. And they work just as long as everybody else is doing it.
Yes, I imagine trying to control a complex system you would need infinite number of controls.
Sure, of course.
Easier to maybe fool yourself to thinking that you have control. So your talk is about situational normal. Everything must change. So what is your kind of key message for leaders and how to navigate complexity?
So my message comes from the point, one of the key things for me is what we call situational awareness. So we operate in multiple different landscapes. One we're very, very familiar with, territorial landscapes, so geographic landscapes, and we understand that in terms of land and borders and all the rest of it. But we also operate in economic, technological, political, and social landscapes. Now, in order to make whenever you look at decisions that you need to make, there are some things which are are quite predictable. You can say if you throw a ball up in the air, it's going to fall down. Okay, most of the time. There are other systems which you can make some sort of predictions about, but it's a lot more difficult to do because there's so many components involved. And of course, then there's some systems which you really can't predict certain outcomes for. No system is entirely one or the other. There's often, whenever you're dealing with a system, there's bits of simple, bits of complicated, bits of complexity all at the same time. But what I try to do is understand that landscape that it's actually operating in, because if you can't see that landscape, you can't see that environment, well, it's a bit like generals fighting a battle with nobody having any maps of the actual territorial landscape. I mean, it boils down to somebody going, oh, we should, I don't know, capture trees. Which trees? I mean, it's almost, and so I see this going on in the economic space and the social and the political space. And so, well, my stuff is about how you map those out. And is it a problem for organizations? Well, just in the economic space alone, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had the Ukraine conflict. And of course, all of these organizations have suddenly discovered that they don't actually understand their supply chains at all. And it's sort of, they've just outsourced it to the market, and that magically worked when there was an abundance. But of course, when there start to be problems and constraints, it all starts to fall apart in all sorts of ways that people didn't realize. But they could have done beforehand. There were ways of finding these constraints. And so that's the sort of stuff I look into.
Great. That's so intriguing. And yeah, situational awareness, I think, is such a key, not just jumping into solutions when it's a complex challenge you're facing. So really looking forward to hearing more about that. So, yeah, see you soon there.
I'll see you soon. And thank you ever so much for inviting me. Real pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us.
A very interesting interview, I must say. And there are a couple of things mentioned in this interview I think that we need to talk a little bit about to make an understanding of. For instance, Ashby's law. Can you help us understand that one?
What I understand is the concept of that if you have a system with many states, to control such a system, you have to have more controls than the kind of states in a system. And of course, if things are complex in large systems, yeah, then you have infinite states, and then you would have to have an infinite large control system. So that will not work. You have to have other ways of managing complexity.
Okay, so it's kind of that only variety can absorb variety. So instead of simplifying the world around you and think that, no, it's just simple, we just develop a nice product and then we put heavily on marketing, everything will be nice. I guess then instead of doing that, you need to accept that the world around you is very complex and things are happening all the time. And what was the right thing to do a couple of months ago could maybe not be the right thing to do right now. So living with the complexity of the world and instead simplifying all the control systems and all the processes within the company, and because then you can handle the variety in the environment. Am I close to understanding what this is?
Yeah, I think so. You have to have more nuanced ways of seeing the complexity. You cannot control it unless it's like, I think, a simple system, switching on the light, you can control it. It's just two states. But a large organization in a complex environment, it's no way you can control it. So you need another approach.
Okay, good. Another thing Simon is telling us during this interview, he says something like, no system is entirely simple or entirely complex. There's always a mix. Can you elaborate a little about that one?
Yeah, I think it's in the, when it talks about the importance of situational awareness. So understanding the situation around you, understanding your context, it's both internally in the organization and the landscape outside. He mentions different landscapes, socioeconomic, geographical, markets, etc., competitors, etc. And to work with strategy, to know what you can do and what is the right thing to do and your capabilities, it's so important to understand the situational awareness. So that's what I think he's talking about here.
Okay.
He mentioned also this example of during COVID and the crisis, there was this supply chain issues. And when there was an abundance, nobody thought about how the supply chains worked in kind of detail. You just used it. but suddenly there was a shortage, and now it was a big problem. And he says that you could have foreseen it, and I suppose if you could have mapped out a bit where the constraints are, etc., you could have foreseen more of it.
Yeah, I think that is very important to understand during those times. Going to highlights, what are your highlights from here?
Yeah, I think again this the importance of the situational awareness. So often we think that we can just manage maybe by simple KPIs or targets, but that is very narrow. You have to have a broader aspect of the landscape. You could have KPIs to make sure that you're within the boundaries, but then making sense of the situation and having those strategic conversations. And here again, I think Wardley Mapping is a really good tool to help you create that situational awareness of your situation. So Thomas, what were your highlights or key takeaways?
Well, I was thinking of, he talked about this outsourcing, and I know from time to time this is really a trend. You should outsource almost everything because then you are a great leader. But I think that is making things a little bit too easy. For instance, I know a lot of companies, they are thinking that we can outsource IT, but when you do a Wardley map, you start to understand that that is actually what is your USP, your USP, unique selling point, the thing that is important that makes you you. For instance, your website or what you are delivering, and outsourcing that to people that does not understand your market, does not understand your customers, it doesn't make sense. And you understand that when you start using a Wardley map, and then you should insource it. You should have it done by people collaborating very closely with the customer and understanding them deeply. And so I think that is also a very good thing with this mapping tool. Understanding what can we outsource and what should we not outsource, what makes us unique, what is the reason why customers are choosing us and not our competitors. That is definitely something we should not outsource.
No, and I think IT, there's different granularities, different components. So if you go down to the kind of smallest layer, there is a lot of standard components. So of course we use Microsoft Office, we have a lot of infrastructure. We don't need to develop that. So those are kind of off-the-shelf things. So then it's obvious though that we can just buy them. And then there are standardized products. Common things is like is ERPs or enterprise systems, salary systems, etc. Probably those could be bought as a product and integrated into our offering. But then there are other kind of are connected to our customer value and offering, and you can easily see that these are things that we want to have control over and develop.
Yeah, so we can outsource the components, but we need to remain the control. Maybe not the right word, but we need to have very skilled people and skilled understanding our customers and our environment for putting the components together. I remember when I was a CTO at a company, the first idea when we want to have a CRM system and customer handling system was that we were outsourcing it. So we were buying something off the shelf. But it showed that when we started implementing it, it was definitely not customized for us, and it was far too expensive. So it became much better to build it ourselves, because then we could automate it much higher, and it was much cheaper as well. So it's not always like, oh, this is a standard component, you can buy it off the shelf. You need to be a little bit more strategic in those things and understanding. So I think this is again where we can have help from this tool.
Yeah, and I have done a couple of workshops with Wardley Mapping, and we when we talk about it, it sounds easy, but in practice it's not, because when you surface all those components, and then you uncover a lot of discussions, and often they are kind of heated and lot of emotion, because probably you have a responsible manager for a component or a product, and it's very easy to think that my product is very special, that's a core offering, and that's not the standard thing, and we want to have that one. But at least with the mapping, you uncover those assumptions and discussions, etc. So you can have fantastic strategic conversations. It opens up for the conversations, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not easy still, but at least now we have much better conversations. And I think Simon talks also about that organizations are really bad at strategy in general. It's like if you had two people fighting blindfolded, because you don't really know your situation and awareness, and suddenly if one could see, that one would beat the opponents easily, right? And with Wardley Mapping you can see much better. So
yeah. So I think the importance is to get this visual. We see it. We can have the good conversations about it and take a strategic decision and not let things just happen because that was said in a book somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap up for today. We're curious about your reflections. Please share your comments. And if you want to learn more about Wardley Mapping and Simon's work, you can watch the recorded masterclass, Situational, Normal, Everything Must Change. And that is from our last year's program of Leading Complexity. So signing up for this year, you get 10 new speakers, but also the last year's speakers, among Simon and many others. So hope to see you there. Go to leadingcomplexity.com to get your tickets.
Do that, because I remember that session was really, really good.
Yeah, it was a fantastic session.
Yes.
Thanks so much. See you next week.
Thank you.